tomorrow, everybody. Happy Monday. This is my kind of show. I'm Frank Morano. Welcome to the other side of midnight. We are only 4 minutes into this show, and already it's clear there's all sorts of chaos, all sorts of shenanigans, all sorts of unpredictability. And I have a feeling that is what we're in store for the next 5.5 hours, which is exactly what I like, because the big difference between doing a live radio show and doing a podcast or anything else is that a live radio show is the last vestige of unscripted unpredictability. And I am just thrilled because this hour we have a gentleman who has unpredictability as his middle name. I am very, very pleased to be joined in studio for the hour by a very good friend of mine. He's been a comedy writer. He's been a stand-up comic. He's been a host of various comedy shows. He's written more books than I've ever actually read. He's been a director, and he's even been a dentist. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome Jeffrey Gurian. Jeffrey, good to see you.
Oh, great to see you, Frank. Thank you so much. I love your energy. Your energy it's contagious.
You know a thing or two about energy, my friend. You know a thing or two about energy.
But you know, it's so important, and most people don't get that.
You're exactly right.
And you bring that. And that's so, I mean, it makes people feel good when they listen to it, you know? There's a real power behind that.
Well, when we spoke the last time, I think it was back in October, I got such an overwhelmingly positive reaction to our interview precisely because people cited your positive energy and the positive message about your life philosophy and in one of your books. Now, what I do want to encourage people to do is there's two types of people in this world. There's people who know who Jeffrey Gurian is, and there's people that don't yet know who Jeffrey Gurian is. If anybody falls into the latter category, I want to encourage them to go to my Facebook page at facebook.com/MoranoFan after the show, or at least after this hour, and watch this terrific, comprehensive 17-minute documentary about you. How they were able to cover so much ground in only 17 minutes is astounding. But that particular documentary begins with comedian Mark Maron asking this question.
You know, for the last 75 years, this hair has been in comedy rooms, comedy events, festivals, and everybody always says the same thing. Who the is that guy?
The documentary is called Who the F is Jeffrey Gurian? It's on the YouTube. I've just linked to it on my Facebook page, facebook.com/MoranoFan. Jeffrey, for people who may not be familiar with you and who might not have heard our previous discussions, you actually began your life in dealing with the public, not as a comic, not as an author, not as a joke writer, but as a dentist. Now, what made you want to pursue dentistry as a career?
I must have been a very strange child. I don't know. I was a cosmetic dentist. And when I was 12 years old, I actually decided what I wanted to do in life. And I knew I wanted to be a doctor, but my sensitivity overwhelmed me. I was a very, very sensitive child. And I knew at that age that I couldn't handle life and death situations. So I thought to myself, well, I was going to an orthodontist. I like to make people beautiful. So I'll be a dentist. And I was already writing comedy at 12 years old. I was writing for the amusement of my friends. And I used to lay awake at night wondering what I was going to do. And I said, you know, I want to be a dentist, but I want to be in show business. But there's no such thing. How can you combine those two things? And that became my life. I never changed. Most 12-year-old kids have no clue what they want to do. Maybe they want to be a fireman or a policeman or whatever. And they usually change their mind. I stuck with it. I kind of knew my calling. And so when I graduated, I was a cosmetic dentist. I met Woody Allen in my senior year of dental school. I contrived a way to meet him because he was my idol. And there were only 3 people in the world I ever wanted to meet at that time: Woody Allen, Salvador Dali, and the Beach Boys. And I met them all.
Wow.
I had the opportunity to spend an evening with Woody Allen, and he read all my material. You know, it was a crazy story. And he inspired me. You know, I was hoping that he was going to say, Jeffrey, let's make movies together. You know,
what did he say?
he invited me back the next night because I was a kid and I didn't know that you don't visit people during intermission, that you're supposed to wait till the end of the show. He was in Play It Again, Sam at the time with Tony Roberts, who he was always...
Great show. Great film.
Oh, exactly. And so I was sending him notes on my dental school cards on the back. We had appointment cards. So I would come to New York on the weekends and I would go to the theater and I made believe I knew him. And I would leave notes with the stage manager. Woody, I haven't seen you in a long time. It's Jeffrey. I'll be coming to the show. And, as if we were friends. I had a lot of nerve in those days. I was like 21 years old, And so I guess I saved up money for tickets. I didn't have the courage to go alone. But I knew that if you're going to meet a big star, you have to prove that you're sane. So how do you prove that you're sane? You either wear a tie or you bring a pretty girl with you, right? I didn't have a tie. I only knew one pretty girl, and she hated me because we had just broken up. But she knew my dream was to meet Woody Allen. So I begged her to come with me, and she did. And I almost chickened out. I showed up with my last card, Woody, I'm here, and I'll be back during intermission. So during intermission, I was very nervous, and I was going to back out. She goes, you can't back out. I came with you. You have to do this. We go backstage, and remember, there was no terrorism in those days.
Right.
There was no security. The stage manager was not in his chair. I ran through. I take her hand. We run up the stairs, but I went the wrong way. I went to the roof. I come back down, and the stage manager says, can I help you? And I said, yes, Woody's expecting me. And he goes, go right in. Right? Which is why they did that animated thing in the documentary about how I met Woody Allen. So I go to his dressing room. It's completely empty. He's in Tony Roberts' dressing room with the entire cast. Now I'm really nervous. And she goes, you have to do this. So I walk up to the door, and I can see this like it was yesterday. Woody's sitting on a couch across the room. The whole cast is in there. I peek in the door, and I go like this to him, like you do to a little child. I crook my finger, like, come over here. And he goes like, me? And I said, yes, you. And he comes over, and he's actually holding my card. And he says to me, you must be Jeff. And at that point, I lost it. I was so amazed that I'm meeting my idol. I started saying weird things to him, like, let's open up a day camp and throw winter clothes at people. I said, let's walk low like we used to in Europe. And he looks at the girl I'm with. He goes, this guy's an effing nut, just like that. And I had to calm down, So I said to him, look, I write comedy. And everyone says that all my stuff is just like yours, and I was hoping that you would look at it. He says, well, I'm in the middle of a show. It's intermission. He goes, do you think you could come back tomorrow night? I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm much too busy. No, I didn't say. I said, of course I'll come back tomorrow night. So I begged the same girl to come with me because I had no self-esteem, and I thought it's always about who's on my arm, right? So I go back the next night, and he says, but come after the show. So I go back, and he sits with me for like an hour in the dressing room, and he read through all of my material. And it wasn't like in script form. As I recall, it was like notes in an envelope, like funny things. And he said to me, he goes, your comedy is very visual, and you should really think of making a film out of it, which I did. Years later, I made a film called The Men Who Series, about men who do very unusual things.
For example?
Men who take a pitchfork to the movies. Men who enjoy Latin dancing with tools. Now, I'm sure you've seen a lot of men dance with tools. But
sure.
I had a guy who did the tango with a wrench. That was unbelievable. So that was a dream for me. So I wound up doing these films, and they were shown in the Toyota Comedy Festival. So from the time I went into practice, I became a cosmetic specialist. And for a couple of years, I didn't do anything in comedy. But when Saturday Night Live started, I was doing films on the street. And I went up to SNL. I was doing like false news items, like several men were arrested for smearing cream cheese on the ankles of elderly women who wore their stockings rolled down like bagels. You ever see the old women with the stock? Looked like bagels to me. So I got my dear grandmother, who did not have a Jewish accent, but she made believe she had a Jewish accent. I was that sick that she let me put cream cheese on her ankles, and she rolled down her stockings. And she says, in the Jewish religion, we have two kinds of stockings, one for milk and one for meat. She goes, and this crazy man, he smeared cream cheese on my meat stockings, and I can't get it off. So I took the films up to Saturday Night Live. I was driving a pimp mobile in those days, I don't know if that was in the documentary
Yes,
also. I had bought an orange Cadillac that had been made for one of the Isley brothers. And I thought that would be appropriate for me. And in those days, the pimps in New York drove these very flashy Eldorados. And I was very impressed with them. I'm like, this is the kind of car that I need. And my wife is like, we're Jewish and we live in Scarsdale. Why am I driving an orange Cadillac?
Right, and you happen to be a dentist, an aspiring comic, not a pimp.
Right. And I had this car with doctor's plates on it. And wherever I went, cops would follow me, hookers, drug dealers. That nobody ever saw a guy like me in a car like that, right? So I used that car to get up to Saturday Night Live. Besides the cream cheese on the ankles thing, I was doing stories about the masters of disguise. They were two master criminals who disguised themselves as inanimate objects to commit their crimes. So it starts with two men disguised as coats rob a hat store. They come in over the arms of two other men, and they say, just act natural like we're your coats and nobody will get hurt, right? And I did many crimes, and I would interview the victims of the crime who would say to me, I don't know what's going on here. It goes, I did I'm going into this optometrist to get my glasses adjusted, and out of nowhere, another pair of glasses jumps on my face and says to me, just act natural like we're your glasses and nobody will get hurt. What's going on? So I do these films, and I decide I have to go up to Saturday Night Live. So I pull up. In those days, you could pull right up to 30 Rock. Again, there was no terrorism. Right. It was easier to do things. These days, they would shoot at you if you.
Sure, right.
Yeah. So I pull up to the door in this car, and I have a CB radio.
So now this is 1975, 76?
77.
Oh, 77.
76, because in 77 was when I started writing comedy. So I pull up to the door. I throw the doorman a few bucks. I said, watch my car. Lorne Michaels is expecting me. Hey. I had so much nerve in those days. I could never do that now. I could never do that. I go inside, and I sneak past security, which you can't do anymore, obviously. And I get in the elevator, and I get up to the floor where SNL is. And Alan Zweibel is playing handball on the wall with a guy named Neil Levy, who is one of the producers, and he's Lorne Michaels' cousin. And I get to meet Alan Zweibel, and I show him my films. To this day, he remembers cream cheese on the ankles. He goes, I can never forget. That image is burned into his psyche, right? So he did the nicest thing for me. Sometimes when you meet people, they tell you they're going to help you, or they give you a number, say, call so-and-so. He called his manager for me. He goes, this guy's got films like I never saw before. He goes, you have to meet with this guy. Turns out his manager was David Jonas, who was managing Freddie Prinze at the time. And he managed the whole circle of comedians. And he got a kick out of the fact that I was a dentist. And he goes, what do you need? This is a crazy business. You're a doctor. What do you need this for? And I'm like, I can't help it. I need to do this, right? But I wasn't thinking jokes. I didn't know how to write a joke yet. I'm thinking cream cheese on the ankles.
Right.
You can't do that on stage. It's very visual.
Sure.
So it took me about a year. He groomed me. And he let me write for his comedians. And I started writing jokes for comedians. It took me about a year to learn how to really create a joke.
So you're simultaneously at this point in the late 70s writing jokes for the David Jonas stable of comedians and practicing dentistry.
Yes. And then in 1980, I started writing for Rodney Dangerfield. He was the first big star I wrote for. And he started doing my stuff on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And that was amazing. And that's how my name started to get around, because once he did my stuff, people are like, hey, those jokes are funny. Who wrote that?
Give me an example of one joke that you might have written for Rodney Dangerfield.
Sure. It was like, he had a stock opening. Like, I'm all right now, but last week was rough. I can't do a Rodney, but everybody, I'm all right now, but last week was rough. He says, I went into one of those custom bed shops. I said, what kind of bed would you recommend for a guy like me? He said, single. a one-line punchline, and Rodney loved that joke. And then one time, and he would pay $50 a joke, which was a lot of money in those days for a joke, because there were people paying $7 and $10, and Then I wrote a joke for him that he used as his opening line, which was a very simple joke. It was like, again, he started with, I'm all right now, but last week was rough. I bought one of those whirlpools for my bathtub. The first night I used it, I lost 3 of my best ships. and he used that as his opening line, and he paid me like $250
Wow.
for that line, because when he would do Carson, he wasn't a conversationalist.
Right.
So he would prepare jokes for his act, and then he would prepare jokes for the couch. And because in those days, if a comedian was invited to the couch, I mean, he was already a star.
Right, that was a big deal. That was Johnny's seal of approval.
You'd get a sitcom the next day, basically.
Now, with your time as a dentist, you actually had some pretty interesting interactions with some of your patients. For instance, our former colleague, a fellow I was out campaigning with yesterday, quite possibly the next mayor of New York City, Curtis Sliwa was a patient of yours when you were his dentist.
I was his dentist, and we had the best time. And, I also had Hell's Angels as patients, and I used to hope that they didn't meet in the waiting room, the Guardian Angels and the Hell's Angels. Yeah, Curtis used to come up, and he always says that I put him back together again. He's been out on the streets fighting crime for so many years. He would get beaten up, and his teeth would get hit. I remember one time he came to me, some guy threw him over a railing. A guy had a shotgun, and he threw Curtis over a railing, and he fell, and he really damaged his teeth. And he would come to me, and I'd patch him up. And we'd have laughs while I was doing it, and we became friends. He's a friend of mine for like 30 years.
Tell me about what led you to leave dentistry and focus full-time on entertainment, showbiz, comedy. If people are just tuning in, we're talking with Jeffrey Gurian. You can learn more about him by going to comedymatterstv.com. He's got a couple of new books out, which we're going to tell you about. He's also performing this week here in Manhattan. We'll tell you about that as well. But tell me about your decision to leave dentistry and focus on entertainment full-time.
I didn't actually leave. What happened was I transitioned from private practice. Then I went to NYU. And I was a clinical professor in oral medicine and orofacial pain. I had a specialty in treating headaches just using my hands without, and I'm glad that you brought this up because this could be very helpful to listeners. In this country alone, there's more than 150 million people who suffer with what they think are migraine headaches. They wake up in the morning, they have neck pain, shoulder pain, back pain. And if you wake up in the morning and your neck hurts, the last person in the world you would ever tell would be your dentist, right? Why would you tell your dentist that your neck hurts? It wouldn't occur to you. Well, very often it's from clenching and grinding the teeth. And we're living with so much stress this past year. I can't tell you how many people have been clenching and grinding their teeth. A lot of friends of mine who are dentists tell me that a lot of people are coming in with cracked teeth over the past year. Cracked and broken teeth from the pressure of grinding.
Wow.
It's a very common habit, but what it can cause are migraine-type headaches, and they can be incapacitating. So my specialty was taking away headaches with no drugs, no injections, just using my hands to release the muscles of the head, first diagnosing. See, a lot of people don't know that they grind their teeth. If you ask them, a lot of people say, no, I don't do that. But unfortunately, a lot of dentists don't check for it, and most physicians are not aware of the symptoms of it. So for the last 20 years, I've been on the board of this group called the Association for Spirituality and Psychotherapy. And I approached, in 1999, I approached this group of psychotherapists to teach them what symptoms depressed people have. Psychotherapists are always working with people who are emotionally disturbed. And very often, people who are depressed clench and grind their teeth. And I use a body, mind, spirit approach. You can't get somebody better. You can't make a person happy if they're having headaches, if they're having physical body pain. A body and mind approach is not enough. A body approach means taking medication. A mind approach is talking to a psychotherapist.
Did there come a point where you stopped dentistry, even under clinical
Yeah. After I left NYU, when I did, I was doing a book that Chris Rock wrote the introduction for. It was a book on the comic strip, the legendary comedy club that's on 81st and 2nd. It's still open after all these years. It opened in 1976. It was Jerry Seinfeld's first club. So when I was doing that book, I decided to make the transition and just be in the comedy world.
And here we are now, and Jeffrey Gurian has played an integral role in the New York comedy scene and the comedy scene in general for the last 40 years. We're going to get into it throughout the hour. If you have questions for Jeffrey, we'll take your calls, 800-848-9222. That's 1-800-848. This is The Other Side of Midnight, joined in studio by one of my favorite people, Jeffrey Gurian, who is a stand-up comic, a writer, a host, an author, a producer, a director, and even, yes, a former dentist. Jeffrey, the last time we spoke, I think it was back in October, you were telling us about how you had a very, very tough battle with COVID. You were not one of these people that were asymptomatic or just lost their taste and were back at work the next day, were you?
No, when I do something, I go in all the way, Frank. I got it in March when it first came out. I didn't want to wait. I got it right away. And, I was sick for 2 weeks before I had to call an ambulance. But yeah, I wound up with COVID double pneumonia. Single was not enough for me. I went in with both lungs, And I joke about it now, but it was really, really bad.
No, I saw the
was
photos
sick for 2
of you
months.
in the hospital. How long were you hospitalized?
They only kept me for 4 days until they stabilized me. They were concerned with bringing down my fever on the first day, and my circulatory system was collapsing. Normal blood pressure is 120/80. My 80 had dropped to 42. So they were having a hard time even getting a vein to start an IV. And on my second day, they started me on hydroxychloroquine. But there were some very interesting things that happened that probably helped to save me. It sounds weird to say that I was lucky I had a heart attack 5 years ago because I've been on blood thinners ever since. And when I got COVID, they didn't know that blood clotting was one of the major problems. That's how that Broadway star, Nick Cordero, lost his life.
Oh, interesting.
So luckily, I was already on blood thinners. I never stopped taking them. They told me I could have stopped, and I decided to stay on them. And as a doctor, I always keep antibiotics in the house. On my third day, the virus went to my throat. I got a sore throat. And when I get a sore throat, it gets really bad. And I always start on antibiotics right away. So, of course, I didn't know I had COVID. I thought maybe I had just caught a cold or something like that. And usually you take Z-Pak for 5 days. I stayed on it for 10 days. But I was getting sicker and sicker. I just didn't have a sore throat. I had all the other symptoms, body pain, nausea from morning to night. It didn't stop. Just fever, sweats. Usually when you have a fever and you break out in a sweat, the fever breaks. Not with COVID, man. It was horrible. After 2 weeks, I had to call an ambulance. So they put me in isolation for 2 days. Actually, they were almost going to send me home until they x-rayed my lungs, and a pulmonary specialist came and he said, "I'm sorry to tell you, you have COVID double pneumonia. We're going to find a room for you." So they put me in isolation for 2 days, and on the third day, they moved me to a room with 3 other very sick men, all with the virus. And this is the truth. I was hoping they were kidding me. They told me that the man in the bed next to me was from Wuhan, China.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm like, listen, that can't even happen. That's ridiculous, I'm laying there next to patient 0. Right? and when I expressed my concern to the nurse, she told me not to worry, and she pointed to a thin curtain that was hanging between us. Meanwhile, she's wearing a hazmat suit with swim fins and scuba gear. I have a thin curtain there. I'm like, too bad Dr. Fauci didn't know about the thin curtain approach. The thin curtain business would have exploded.
You were treated with hydroxychloroquine. You were taking the Z-Pak on your own, and ultimately you were able to recover.
Yeah, they kept me for 4 days. What happened? They had run out of rooms. They were putting people in the hallways. This was at the epicenter of the virus, when New York was the epicenter. So once they stabilized me, after they put me on hydroxy, they started me on a double dose. And by the next day, my oxygen was staying at 95 to 96%. They had me walk across the room to make sure that I didn't lose my oxygen. And on the 4th day, they had an ambulance take me home. And then I was sick for another 2 months.
My goodness.
It took 2 months to recover.
Now, you actually wrote a book about your experience. It's called Fight the Fear. What are people going to learn in this book beyond what you just described, the chronology of your COVID experience?
Only one chapter was about COVID. Fight the Fear is because, for whatever reason, and I know this applies to a lot of people, fear is a bully. I've been fighting fear since I'm a kid. I was a very severe stutterer from the time I was 6 or 7 years old through my 20s and beyond. I stuttered so badly that I couldn't even say my name. And I don't know where the fear came from. I was not taught that the world was a safe place. I was overprotected. My mother kept me in a crib till I was 6.5 years old.
Wow.
Can you believe that? Don't do that when you have a child. Don't keep them in a crib till they're 6.5.
After 2, it's no longer a crib, it's a prison.
Yeah,
Yes.
I remember climbing out of my crib. My grandfather bought me my first two-wheeler, and I climbed out of my crib to see the bike. So anyway, I was overprotected, and I grew up with a lot of fears. But I've always confronted my fear. When I was a kid and I was afraid of the dark, I made myself go in the dark. To this day, I confront my uncomfortability to the point where just before COVID, I went to Japan all by myself because it was the scariest thing I could think of to do. So there are chapters in this book of how I conquered stuttering, how I conquered the fear of going on stage to perform for the first time, how I conquered, how I was able to survive a widowmaker heart attack by using positive energy.
You're like the G. Gordon Liddy of comedy.
It's a weird thing, man.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing. But you know what? I believe that the universe presents you with obstacles, and you can either let them crush you or you can somehow overcome them so that you can help other people.
So let's say somebody's listening to us right now,
Right.
and they're afraid of something, whatever the something might be, approaching a woman for a date, or public speaking, or whatever the case may be. What's the first step in conquering, maybe heights, whatever the case may be? What's the first step in conquering that fear?
Heights is something different because that's a real phobia. I'm talking about fears that are sometimes unrealistic fears. You have to realize that if other people can do something, that you can do it too. If you wanted to be the president or the pope where there's only one person, then I could understand where you could doubt yourself. Pardon me. But if you want to be a doctor or some kind of professional where millions of other people have done it, who are you to tell yourself that you can't do it? It's like reverse egotism. You have to have enough self-esteem and self-confidence to realize that you can accomplish just about anything you want to in this life. And so my fear is a bully that tells you that you can't accomplish anything. In order for me to conquer stuttering, and as you can see, I don't stop talking.
I stutter more than you do at
Right.
this point.
I've been given the gift of figuring out how not to stutter. And now I work with stutterers all over the world. So I'm always grateful to be able to talk about it. I had to literally change my mind. And that was the focus of my first book, which is called my first happiness book. I have 2 books on how to achieve happiness. The first one is called Healing Your Heart by Changing Your Mind, a spiritual and humorous approach to achieving happiness. So healing your heart is not about a heart attack thing. It's about from the time we're children, every time somebody hurts your feelings or breaks a promise to you or hurts you in some way, breaks up with you in a relationship, you keep that inside of you in your heart chakra. And I call them heart wounds. You know, they teach us this stupid thing when you're kids. Sticks and stones will break your bones, but words will never harm you, which is the furthest from the truth. Because all the bruises you had as a kid healed up a long time ago. But every single one of us can remember something that someone said to us that hurt our feelings or insulted us in some way. And those are what I call heart wounds. And for some reason, the traumas are more deeply ingrained than the happy times. So during the course of a day, we get triggers. So with stuttering, something happens that reminds, like most stutterers started stuttering when they were maybe 6, 7 years old, but they were already speaking fine from the time they're 2. Something happens that triggers an old memory, and they become that child again who needed to stutter, and they stutter as an adult. And so what I do is I work through them to literally change their mind, to build up self-confidence and self-esteem. If you can speak better when you're alone. I realized one day I didn't stutter when I was alone. I could go into a room by myself and speak perfectly.
Right. So clearly then it's not neurological, it's psychological.
Yeah, well, you can't have a disability based on your location.
Right.
Right? If a man has a limp, he limps in every room
Right.
of his house. He can't go in a room, close the door, and walk perfectly. But if I could speak better when I'm alone, then theoretically it means there's nothing wrong with me.
We're talking with Jeffrey Gurian, author of 2 new books, both with a great message with a lot of helpful tips. One is called Fighting the Fear. One is called Healing Your Heart. How can people get a hold of those books, Jeffrey?
They're both on Amazon. And
they just search you, Jeffrey Gurian, Gurian.
And healing your heart by changing your mind. There's a picture of a meditating dog on the cover. I can't miss it.
I love it.
A dog in lotus position sitting on an orange pillow. Orange is the color of the second chakra, the chakra of creativity and change. So it's all about learning to change the way you think, how to process things. When I was laying in the hospital with the heart attack, right? It came out of nowhere. I had never been sick a day in my life. The night before, I'm partying with the Sirius XM people. The next day, I'm in the hospital, in an ambulance, the middle of the day.
Wow.
And I had to stay positive because when you're in a negative state, your immune system is not functioning properly. When you're positive, you can fight off infection. Your immune system functions much better. So I had to learn to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. I had to do what I've been writing about, and I had to take control of my mind and tell myself, this is my path. You know, there's a tendency to say, why me, right? Why does this happen to me? But the spiritual answer is, why not me? Whoever promised you that you're supposed to have a perfect life and nothing is ever supposed to happen to you? So I had to process all that, and I was back on stage 5 days after I had this widowmaker heart attack. And the owner of the club says to me, what are you, crazy? You just had a heart attack. And I'm like, yeah, but it's hard to get a spot here. I don't want to lose my spot.
We're talking with Jeffrey Gurian. You can check out both of his books. They're available on Amazon. Just search Jeffrey Gurian, Gurian. In just a minute, I'll tell you how you could see Jeffrey Wednesday at the Cutting Room. 800-8489. Sure plays a mean pinball. This is The Other Side of Midnight. My guest in studio for the hour is the great Jeffrey Gurian, distinguished comedian, writer, author, you name it, he's done it. And you can learn more about some of his work, see some of the great videos that he's done, including this hair, which is well known all over the New York comedy scene. Just go to ComedyMattersTV.com. That's ComedyMattersTV.com. Jeffrey, now comedy clubs are reopened in New York. You're going to be performing this Wednesday at the Cutting Room?
Yes, I'm doing a very big show. In celebration of my 1 year recovery from COVID, they asked me to bring in a comedy show. And I have a great lineup. I'm producing, but I'm also hosting the show. And I have people like Vlad Camanyo, who's hilarious. He was on the CBS show Tommy last season with Edie Falco, who's one of the stars. And Derek Gaines from The Last OG with Tracy Morgan. He was in the movie The King of Staten Island with Pete Davidson.
Sure.
And Maceo from Uptown Comedy Corner with Tracy Morgan also. And Aaron Berg, who's got his own show called In Hot Water on the Compound Media. So I have an amazing lineup of talent.
What time does it start Wednesday?
8 o'clock. Doors open at 7. It's 44 East 32nd Street. They serve dinner. They have delicious food. It's a beautiful evening out. People need to laugh again.
I love the Cutting Room. It's a great room.
Yeah, it's a great place. It's Chris Noth's place. People know him from Sex and the City, Mr. Big.
Do people need to buy tickets in advance?
It would be nice if they do, so the club sees that there's interest in the show. We've already sold a ton of tickets, but there are still some available, and it's good to do that. It's on the Cutting Room site. It's www.cuttingroomnyc.com, and it takes you to Eventbrite, and that's where you can buy the tickets. They're only $20. And it's going to be an amazing show.
CuttingRoomNYC.com. Couple of people eager to chat with you. 800-848-9222. Mary Beth is in Huntington. You're on with Jeffrey Gurian. Hello, Mary Beth.
Good morning. First, I just wanted to say, Frank, I hope you had a nice, happy Father's to Be Day. And
thank you very much.
To you and your wife.
Thank you very much.
Jeffrey Gurian, I can't believe I woke up and tuned in, and there you were. You are amazing.
Thank you.
May I ask you a question? First of all, your comedy is brilliant. I should be focusing on that. But when you started talking about the pain that so many people endure that could be from grinding your teeth, and I mean, I know I have that. And you said something about a hands-on approach. How do you find someone who does that?
It's a strange answer. I wish I knew. I don't know anybody else who does that. I lectured on it recently to the doctors at Temple University, and when I was teaching at NYU, they asked me to lecture on it there. I don't know of people who are doing it. I think it's something that needs to be taught in the schools. I suggested it to the dean of Temple University because that's where I graduated from. And I suggested it when I was teaching at NYU. The head of oral medicine called me into her department. And anytime someone calls me in, I think I'm in trouble, like a kid, right? And I thought they were going to fire me. But instead she said, what you're doing, we really need to teach. I'm going to try to raise money for a budget to teach people so that you could teach people how to do this. And unfortunately, it never happened. And I don't know any practitioners who do it, but it's important for people to know that it's possible to be done, that surgery for TMJ is not a good thing. It's important to treat it as conservatively as possible. Are you getting headaches?
Severe neck pain.
Neck pain when you wake up in the morning?
My gosh, yes. Yeah,
well, has anyone ever diagnosed you as a grinder?
Years ago, and they would make those horrible guards, and I would wake up in the morning, and I must have taken it out of my mouth in my sleep and thrown it across the room. I could not wear those things.
Exactly. Well, a lot of people did because most dentists make hard night guards for the upper teeth. What I did for 20 years or more, I saved hundreds of people. A soft night guard for the lower teeth is what you need. You won't take it out while you're sleeping. Soft enough that you can actually bend it in your fingers. It's a soft vinyl material. And you may have to fight with your dentist because he's going to try to insist that you should have a hard one for the upper teeth. But you tell him that I told you to get a soft one for the lower teeth. I've been wearing one for many, many years, and I cured literally hundreds and hundreds of people who had headaches, and the headaches went away. And the headaches can be so severe. I once had a girl call from an emergency room who was literally suicidal because of the pain. And some genius there said to her, by any chance, do you grind your teeth? And she said, yes. And she called me and she said, is it possible that the pain is from that? And she put in her night guard and the pain went away. And they were ready to do brain tests on her because her pain was so bad. That's how bad the pain can get because when you're grinding a lot, the muscles in your head cramp up. And you can't really tell because the muscles in your head are very thin. They're stretched over the bone. If you get a cramp in your calf, you feel it right away because the calf is a fleshy muscle. But the muscles in your head are very thin. And so you're not really aware when they cramp up, but that's where the headaches come from. So hopefully your dentist, if you have a dentist, if you explain to him that you want a soft night guard for the lower teeth, that should help you a lot. And I wish I was still in practice because I would tell you to come and see me.
Thanks, Mary Beth.
You at the Comedy Club, and I'm so glad you're well after the COVID. God bless you, and God bless you, Frank, and your wife.
Thank you, Mary Beth.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
It's so kind of you.
800-848-9222. We're going to get to the rest of the calls in just a moment, and a couple of other open lines if people want to jump on board. Let me ask you, Jeff, as somebody that I consider you very much a comedy expert. You've written for a lot of great comedians, some of the greatest of all time. You've performed yourself. You've produced and hosted a lot of great comedy shows. You've also known personally many great comedians. I feel like in any craft or really any public performance, whether you're talking baseball, talk radio, music, comedy, that there are a lot of people who are incredibly talented but don't necessarily achieve the kind of acclaim that other stars in their field do. There's certainly a lot of very famous, very talented comedians like Chris Rock, Jerry Seinfeld, Jim Gaffigan, Colin Quinn. The list goes on and on. But if you had to pick, who do you think is the most talented comic you've ever seen who really never achieved a level of superstardom commiserate with their talent?
Gee, that's such a rough question. Comedy is so subjective. First of all, what some people find hilarious, other people are just humming, And like the first comic I ever wrote for, his name is Dick Capri, and Dick Capri was in the show Catskills on Broadway.
I saw that show. I love that show.
Yeah, he was wonderful, but a lot of people don't know him. And, he kind of mentored me in my early days because when Alan Zweibel sent me to David Jonas, Dick Capri was the first comedian who paid me for jokes, which was an amazing feeling to get paid for jokes, And he would do my stuff at all the hotels in the Catskills, because in those days that was a big thing. And so maybe I would say him because he's hilarious and he's a real showman. Comedy has changed so much, you know. These days, everyone thinks they're a comedian. The clubs in every state has comedy clubs, and they're packed with people who think that they're funny. And I find a lot of comedy these days objectionable. I'm not talking about that you have to be clean, but a lot of young comics think that you have to talk about going to the bathroom. To me, it's not funny. If that's, you know, you're supposed to outgrow that when you're 9 or 10. If you still think that's funny when you're in your 20s or older than that, then you're not being really creative. So I like people that are very unique. Gilbert Gottfried is very unique. Judah Friedlander is very unique. I just found a guy from my show on Wednesday, Daniel Simonson, who's from Norway, who's one of the funniest guys that I've seen in a long time. I couldn't believe I never saw him. He did Colbert, and he did a couple of late-night shows. And I was really very pleasantly surprised to find somebody new, because the documentary, like Nick Kroll says, I know everybody in comedy. And Ron Bennington said, I'm the only person he knows that knew the greats, like Milton Berle, who was my sponsor in the Friars Club, where I saw you the other night.
Isn't that incredible? It's amazing. The Milton Berle, who has a room named for him in the Friars Club, Mr. Friars Club, was your sponsor.
Was my sponsor, right? What an honor, right? And I got to write for Jerry Lewis and Henny Youngman, and I knew all the greats. And I'm friends with Nick Kroll and John Mulaney. I'm the first guy to be pranked with Too Much Tuna by Nick Kroll and John Mulaney. And they had me open their Broadway show for them. And they made me, you'll love this story. They made me a special jacket. They didn't know that I knew Curtis Lewa. And they mentioned the Guardian Angels in their show, Oh Hello, on Broadway. They made me a jacket. Instead of Guardian Angels, it said Gurian Angels. and it was an exact replica of Curtis Lewa's jacket. They didn't make me wear the beret because of my hair, right?
That's hysterical.
So I brought Curtis to the show as a surprise to them, and Fred Armisen was the guest that night. If you know about Too Much Tuna, they prank people with a very big tuna sandwich. It's about this tall, right? I'm the first. I'm the very first. And we did it in Montreal at the Just for Laughs Festival, and they had me give the tuna sandwich to Judd Apatow, the king of Hollywood, right? They said, Jeffrey, and I wore my jacket. They had me wear my
Gurian Angels.
My Gurian Angels jacket. And they had two models wearing Gurian Angels T-shirts. It was hilarious. So you're right. I've had the honor of working with some of the greats of all time. And if I had to answer your question, which is, I would say Dick Capri.
I think that's a fine answer. I've seen Dick Capri perform in Atlantic City. I think he's hysterical.
He used to do all the roasts, too.
Yeah,
he killed at all the roasts.
I agree with you. I think he's hysterical. 800-848-9222. Jeff is in Jersey City. Hello, Jeff. You're on with Jeffrey Gurian.
Thanks for taking my call, Frank. Jeffrey, I have a comment and a question for you quickly.
Sure.
I confronted, as you suggest, my fear by asking my psychiatrist if I can learn to speak Chinese. And he said, yes, I can learn. So this was at the outbreak of the pandemic, February 2020. I called a travel agent to book a flight to Wuhan. And they said, well, wait a minute. And they said, call back. And they said, we could get you a flight there. You may have trouble coming back. I said, okay. But that was enough to sort of neutralize my fear because the panic that was coming with, we're all going to die from the Wuhan virus. Was on my nerves, and I needed something to neutralize it. That worked. And I want to ask you one question about a comedian you would know, I would guess, Robert Klein, one of the best I've ever, at least in my estimation.
I'm a huge Robert Klein
I'm proud
fan.
to say he's a good friend of mine. Yeah, he and David Brenner started observational comedy.
He was on in a show with Lucy Darnez, and it was fantastic. And the last question, quickly, Jeff. Eileen Brennan, can be considered a comic actress, or so she had some dramatic roles also?
I'm not really familiar with her work. I'm sorry, Jeff. It's not a question I can answer.
In Private Benjamin.
Pardon me? Private Benjamin? I'm not really familiar with her work, so it wouldn't be right of me to comment. I'm not sure what she is. But I'm glad you brought up Robert Klein because he really changed comedy. He and David Brenner together started observational comedy, and then Jerry Seinfeld took that over. Years ago,
Yeah.
nobody
Andy
did that.
Kaufman wasn't bad either.
Sorry, Jeff, what was that?
And Andy Kaufman, he was also an innovator.
Very unique.
That's for sure.
But the whole First Avenue, like you said, was lined with comedy shops. I mean, it was one, your buddy Dangerfield, and it said Dangerfield was on 61st First Avenue, and then the next shop said, "Here you get respect," and the next one was a playoff on that. There was What's on First, and all these different clubs. I mean, it was really a great time to be in New York. If you wanted to laugh, all you had to do was walk up the street and read the names of the shops.
Well, unfortunately, Dangerfield just went out of business because of COVID. After 50 years, They opened in 1969, and now it's for rent for the last few months.
Jeff, thanks for the call. Do you think now that comedy clubs are reopened, they got a little bit of help from the federal government, how comfortable do you see audiences being in going back to comedy clubs? And do you think that in the long term, comedy clubs will thrive as they did in years past?
Yeah, people need to laugh. When the clubs opened in early April, I went out. I went to 9 clubs that night, not to see the shows, to interview the owners of the clubs, to get their take on what was happening. Because for the last 20 years, I've been writing a blog or a vlog called Comedy Matters, besides Comedy Matters TV, which is my YouTube channel. So if I'm not performing, I'm interviewing people and I'm behind the scenes. And I wanted to write an article for the Interrobang, which is a big comedy website, about what's happening in comedy, because it was only open at 33%. So I went to the Comedy Cellar and I went to Stand Up New York and New York Comedy Club, and I went all over and I spoke to everybody. And they were all very hopeful. I didn't stay for the show because I was still nervous. I didn't want to be in a room full of people because I had COVID and I got a shot too.
Right.
I got the Johnson & Johnson shot. I was sick for 5 days, but my cardiologist felt that I should get the shot. Besides, I have enough antibodies for everybody now, basically. I could just hand out antibodies in the street. And they better work. I'm telling you, they better work because I had a very rough time. I don't want to go through that again. But comedy is back now at 100%. And I've been at shows. I've been performing at shows. People are not nervous. They seem to be okay. But you know what? The other night at the Friars Club, when we were there, it was the first night I was in a crowd where people were very close to each other. And I have to be honest, I felt a little bit nervous.
Well, I mean, for the last year and a half, everybody's been so programmed to be isolated that I can understand that.
And you don't know if someone doesn't have a mask on, if it's because they were vaccinated or because they don't care.
Right.
So it's confusing to people. So people are walking in the street, moving their masks up and down. It's like nobody really knows. It's at a weird time. But comedy is back full time, 100%. People need to laugh, and the clubs are full.
Jeffrey, in 10 seconds, tell me this. Is comedy something that can be taught, or is something that can you learn to be funny, or is it something that you're born with?
I think you can learn to be funnier, but you have to have a natural sense of humor. I think it's something that you're born with. We see the world in a different way than most people. Comedians, that's what makes it relatable to the audience, because you talk about things that they experience, but you put your own spin on it.
Jeffrey Gurian, check him out Wednesday at the Comedy Club. Check out his 2 books. One is Fight the Fear. One is Healing Your Heart. Both available on Amazon. Thank you, Jeffrey.
The Cutting Room. Thank you so much, Frank. It's always great to be on with you. Your energy is amazing.
Let's do it again soon.
I hope so, man. Hey, guys. Thanks for watching Comedy Matters TV. To check out some of our other videos, click on the boxes on either side of me. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Not just for me, but for my parents.